Welcome to this edition of Popcorn Diaries. Today we are going to focus on the career of the one and the only Mel Brooks.
Yay!
This man has done it all. He has written, he has starred in movies, he has produced, he has his own production company. It is incredible what this man has been doing for so many decades, and we thought it was necessary to pay homage to Mel Brooks. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about him, of course, and some of the things he's done, and then we're going to focus on 5 of his best efforts in filmmaking. Of course, he started out with the producers, and then we're going to talk about Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, History of the World Part 1, and Spaceballs. So let's just dive right into Mel himself and talk about some of the wonderful things that Mel has done.
Well, what hasn't he done? He's been in everything. He's done a lot of stuff on Broadway. A lot of the movies come either from Broadway or end up on Broadway, like The Producers. Mm-hmm. We've seen him create wonderful, witty, kind of raunchy films. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So let's talk about Young Frankenstein.
Young Frankenstein, one of my all-time favorite movies. If you see nothing else that Mel Brooks has done, Young Frankenstein pretty much sums up his style.
It does.
It's fun. It's tongue-in-cheek. He makes fun of just about everything he can. There's no doubt that he doesn't take himself too seriously in this movie and many, many others that he has made. This was 1974. He decided to make a parody, which he does a lot of. Yeah. And so, of course, he went after the world-famous Frankenstein franchise, which there's been well over 100 movies made. He has really been the only person who took a stab at it as far as a parody comedy goes.
Yeah, and what a great stab he did take. I mean, what makes Mel Brooks movies so entertaining to watch and you fall in love with is the dialogue. A lot of it is the dialogue and the interaction between the different characters. And this all comes from Mel Brooks because he writes the screenplays. He's very much involved in the creation of these movies. We have Gene Wilder in this movie. Oh, and what a performance by Gene as the von Frankenstein.
Frankenstein, yeah.
And don't forget to pronounce it correctly.
Yep.
And what can we say about the cast for this film? I mean, you've got Gene Wilder, you've got Peter Boyle as the monster, you got Marty Feldman as Igor, and Madeline Kahn, who plays Elizabeth, in the love interest in this film. It is just hilarity through and through. It's great comedy, great deliverance by all of these great actors for dialogue that was written very well. We've got a lot of different little innuendos happening in all of his films. That's one of the things that's great about Mel Brooks is he's not afraid to say what needs to be said.
Nope, he likes to take a shot.
He does. Even if it's very risque, he will take a stab at it, and most of the time, it's a winner. So that's one of the things that is great about Mel. He doesn't pull any punches. He goes right for the jugular.
Yeah, he pretty much does it the way he wants to, and Young Frankenstein is a perfect example of that. Again, writing the screenplay for it, also directing. This is one of the few movies he was not in.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's typically in his movies one way or another. Terry Garr was in this, and this was her screen debut. She was, I think, 19 years old when she made this. This was her first break, and that launched her career. Also, he took a risk on this. He filmed this in black and white.
Yeah, that was a big risk, especially considering that color had been around, fairly for about 15 years, and everyone was shooting color. Technicolor, Panavision, all of that was huge in this time. And he decided to go backwards in time, but it worked.
It did work.
And it still works today. You watch this movie, and it's rich, and it's beautiful. It was shot well. The lighting was spectacular.
Yeah, lighting
they
is very
paid
good.
attention to detail, If you look at a lot of the shots and you compare them to the original Frankenstein, the lighting is very similar. So that was a great attention to detail on their part.
Yeah, he was definitely paying homage to the movies of the 30s and
Metropolis
and the Wolfman and all the rest of those that really exploited the black and white cinematography. One key note there is a lot of the laboratory equipment that they used, making all the sparks and all that kind of stuff, was from the original Frankenstein movie from 1931.
Oh, I did not know that.
He managed to find that in some warehouse somewhere. So, but you mentioned that Mel making somewhat of raunchy movies. That moves us into Blazing Saddles.
Oh, Lord. and if you notice, he worked a lot with the same cast of characters. We have Gene Wilder back again in Blazing Saddles, and wow, was this raunchy.
This one's a bit raunchy, you're right, but he brought Madeline Kahn back as Lily von Stoop. But you're right, he does tend to use the same folks over and over. If you go and take a look, you'll see that in many of his films, he's used people 3 and 4 or 5 times.
Yes, he has.
So he finds who he likes, and he knows the kind of performance
them.
And he sticks with them, which I think is just a great recipe for success. And Blazing Saddles was a success. That was, I believe, his #1 movie as far as income.
Actually, Spaceballs is one of his top. Spaceballs and Men in Tights, Robin Hood Men in Tights, are his 2 top grossing films.
Okay.
But it's not your typical Western. You don't have those long, silent spaces. No, this is a very much a comedy.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of innuendo. There's a lot of in-your-face comedy. And there are some things that might make you uncomfortable, but take it in the form that it's put out. It's comedy.
Yeah, it is a hilarious movie. Everyone in that cast does a great job. Cleavon Little playing Bart, the sheriff, is just unbelievable. And let's not forget our good friend Alex Karras, who played Mongo, one of my favorite characters. And then from there, we slide into History of the World Part 1.
This is one of my favorite Mel Brooks films. It is just such little parodies or snippets of time in a comedy sense that is just spectacular. You've got a lot of musical numbers. Mel is known for his musical numbers.
There's a lot in this movie.
And there's a lot in this movie. One thing that I thought was amazing about Mel is that he actually does not read music. So he's never written an actual song out. What happens is he hums the songs, records them, of him humming them, and then somebody transcribes them into music. To see songs like The Inquisition
is just hilarious.
You know, that, oh my God, the hilarity of the song, the dance number, just everything that they did to put out that production was just amazing.
What's very interesting about this movie is it covers from the dawn of man through the French Revolution, hence being History of the World Part 1. There never was a Part 2. There never was intended to be a Part 2. That's part of the joke.
Yeah.
You know, and everyone was waiting, oh, where's Part 2? Where's Part 2? Well, it never, and he even had a trailer at the end of the movie.
Yes, he did.
Talking about Part 2 with no intention of making it. It's the best inside joke. And again, he used a lot of the same people. Again, he's got Dom DeLuise in there again, Madeline Kahn's in there again, Cloris Leachman, Sid Caesar, and some great, great actors of the day. There's even Orson Welles narrating, which is very, very cool. He does a great job there. And Hugh Hefner actually makes an appearance. Mel plays 5 different roles in this movie.
I mean, he's won a couple different things. He's been nominated for 2 Oscars, won one of them. He won for writing the screenplay for The Producers, but he was nominated for Best Writing for Young Frankenstein and then Best Music for Blazing Saddles. I'm really surprised that History of the World was not nominated for many things, considering how extensive the numbers are in this movie.
Yeah, you could almost argue the point that this was close to being a musical.
Yes, it was almost close to being a musical. This is something that I'm actually surprised that he also didn't produce for stage, because it lends itself to that almost stage presence. It's very, very theatrical, if you will.
Yep.
This movie has just such great little inside jokes, one-liners.
Oh, they're everywhere.
Oh, it's hilarity in itself.
Yeah, and many of those lines have been used time and time again in other movies. Probably the most famous line is where he is playing King Louis and looks straight at the camera, breaking all the rules, saying, "It's good to be the king."
It's good to be the king.
Once you see that, you just never forget that line and that scene.
Actually, my favorite line from this movie is "Count the money."
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's...
that little shtick with "Count the money." It's de Monet.
Yeah.
It's de Monet.
That was played by Harvey Korman. You got to pay attention. The one-liners just hit again and again and again. And that brings us to 1987 and Spaceballs.
One of my top films. I've watched this movie over and over and over. Again, this is another parody film. Parodies off of Star Wars franchise.
Yep.
It's a little vulgar sometimes.
Yeah. It is, but it's drop-dead hilarious.
But it is just hilarious. Everything in this movie comes together just beautifully. Nice little tidbit about Mel is when he took his senior portrait for his high school, he stated that he wanted to be president of the United States. And 43 years later, he played President Scrooge. It was one of his best roles. Oh, I love him in this. It's just, he's Scrooge, he's yogurt, and he just plays these parts perfectly. Everybody else also did a great job. John Candy's in this.
Yeah, as Barf.
Yes, who's supposed to portray Chewbacca. It's so hilarious.
Yeah, and he's got a lot of his regulars in here. Again, Rick Moranis, who's playing Dark Helmet, which is the takeoff on Darth Vader, of course. Dick Van Patten and others that are in here. Joan Rivers does the voice of Dot Matrix, which is a robot running around that's just like Joan Rivers.
Yeah.
If
C-3PO.
Yeah, supposed to be the C-3PO. And let's not forget Bill Pullman, who played Lone Star, who I thought just an outstanding job. He pokes everywhere he can to make fun of Star Wars on this, and I think he's pretty successful doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good bits in this movie, great scenes, especially with Rick Moranis playing Lord Helmet and that huge helmet that he had to wear throughout this whole production. I feel bad. I hope that thing didn't weigh that much because it is humongous. It literally covers all his head.
Rick was a perfect choice to play Dark Helmet.
Had a lot of little cameos in this as well.
Yeah, cameos were all over the place.
We have a great cameo piece with Michael Winslow that came from the Police Academy, doing his bit with, making the sounds of the radar and, when the radar is jammed and we've got jam pouring out of the radar. It's just so hilarious. There's just so many wonderful things that I could say about this film. If you've never watched any of Mel Brooks' films, this is probably one of the ones you're going to identify the most with because it directly parodies one of the best films, also Star Wars. It is just done so well that you can't fault it for it.
Yeah, and you can't help to think that of all the movies we've been talking about so far, that it looks like they have a lot of fun doing this. You can just see the characters are enjoying their roles. And I just bet you the behind-scenes activities were just hilarious when they were making these movies. And don't discount some of the other wonderful movies he made. Silent movie High Anxiety, Life Stinks, Robin Hood Men in Tights, Dracula, Dead and Loving It. So he's had quite the career, but it hasn't just been parody movies and that type of thing. He's also been involved in doing some serious work, too.
He has done some original work as well, not just parodies like The Producers, which is what put him on the map. Yeah. This was one of his original works, and this was something that he was kicking around. Actually, the first mention of this movie being produced was in a Playboy magazine. He was being interviewed, and they asked him what he was working on, and he said, Hitler in Springtime. And they were like, are you joking? And he's like, no, I've got some ideas. I'm working on it. So he knew what he wanted to do. He wrote this great film that has been widely successful, has been on Broadway, has had 2 movies made. So we had the original 1967 movie, and then it was remade again in 2005.
Yep.
His work speaks for itself. It's comedic genius. He pushes the limits of comedy when it comes to making you a bit uncomfortable about the subject matter, but it works to a degree that you don't forget it. Some of the lines in all of his movies have been used widely in other films.
Yep.
Not to mention that, this being his first film, he then later references this film in all his other films by tying in some sort of Nazi reference. So he has embodied his work, put his stamp on it, and anytime you watch any of his movies, you're going to laugh.
And the amazing thing is, he's still at it today. He's been doing a lot of voiceover work. They're using him again in Hotel Transylvania 2.
Which I can't wait for.
Yeah, so he is still active. He's still out there doing it. If you've never seen his work, pick up any of the movies that we just kind of reviewed here. Maybe start with Spaceballs would probably be a good place to go, and then hit the others, and you'll clearly start to see the pattern and the type of comedy that he presents. And he truly is one of the great comedic filmmakers of our day.
One thing that you should know about Mel Brooks, and it's something that while you watch his films and you see the history of his work, you kind of notice he has a huge thing for names. He really likes giving weird or funny names, like, for example, in Spaceballs, we had Prince Valium, who was always falling asleep. We had the planet Druidia with the Druids and President Scroob, and just so many wonderful character names. And he came up with all these character names, so you could really see that unfold in the history of his work.
A couple of other interesting tidbits. All of his movies have featured some sort of a wacky song and dance type of number, and that all of his lead characters in his film have been male.
One of the great things about Mel Brooks and working with Mel Brooks is that he is always open to ideas. He's always always open to improvisation, and that works really well. So sometimes characters and actors come up with different ideas about what they would like to do, or some idea that pops in their head as they're trying to become this character. One such idea came actually from Mel. The scene in Spaceballs, where Rick Moranis is caught playing with the action figures, was not in the script. But Mel came up with it on the spot and told Rick, hey, I have this idea about, Lord Helmet getting caught playing with action dolls. And Rick Moranis improvised the whole scene. So the dialogue was never even written in the script, and he just came up with it on the spot. Another such instance is, for example, Kenneth Mars, who slept in his costume to better get into character, came up with the idea to have the pigeon defecation on the helmet. So things like that, he's always open to them, and they just add even more comedy to the films.
Speaking of Kenneth Mars, he did a great job as Inspector Kemp in Young Frankenstein.
Oh, yes, he did such a marvelous job at that. So that's going to be it for us on this episode of Popcorn Diaries. I hope you enjoyed our talk of Mel Brooks, and if you haven't seen any of his movies, definitely take a look around. See if Netflix has them. You can definitely come into the library. I know we have a few. And check one out. Take a look. I guarantee you will laugh. Next time on Popcorn Diaries, we are going head to head. So this is going to be a battle of wills again between Joe and I. The way this is going to work is we're going to pick a movie that Joe loves and I hate, and then vice versa, turn around and do a movie that I love and he hates. And we are going to go head to head. He's going to defend, I'm going to attack. And let's just see what happens. Hopefully we're still friends after this.
I'm sure we will be, and I know it's probably very hard to believe that folks out there think I hate a movie, but there's a couple out there that I just can't stand.
Yeah, there are. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of Popcorn Diaries. As always, I'm Adriana.
And I'm Joe.
And this was Popcorn Diaries.